I came across this article last week, and I know that every time we talk vaccines in the wake of COVID, of course, it can get a little, what's the word I'd be looking for? Ornery
Volatile?
from people, because there are people out there, as we know, we learned this during COVID, who are not on board with the idea of vaccines in general. But then you read something like this. Our next guest, nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize last year, by the way, is warning people that the growing anti-vax movement risks undoing the world's progress against not just COVID, but infections as common as measles and even whooping cough. His new book is called The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, A Scientist's Warning. Dr. Peter HOTEZ is on the line. Doctor, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, let me ask the question. So you're a pediatrician. You've been involved in vaccines and, for much of your life, I guess. And when you read a warning from someone, who has done this for so long, that basically says, we could reverse all the successes we've ever had in the last 2 decades by virtue of the fact that this anti-vax movement is growing stronger by the day. That's a pretty grim outlook.
Yeah, I tried to find silver linings in the book, but they were hard to find. This is what's happened in the United States during the COVID pandemic is extraordinary in the negative sense. 200,000 Americans needlessly perished because they refused a COVID vaccine, even though vaccines were widely available and more than 90% protective against severe illness and death during our Delta wave in the last half of 2021 and the BA1 wave in early 2022. And so when you talk about 200,000 deaths that could have been prevented, you say, wow, that's really extraordinary. And then it gets even more difficult to talk about because you have to talk about politics, which we don't like to do in science and medicine. But the reality is this, most of those 200,000 deaths occurred in what we call red states, red being Republican, blue meaning Democrat, and the redder the county, the lower the immunization rate and higher the death rate. And so that we call it misinformation or infodemic as though it's just some random junk that people happen to come upon on the internet, but it's not that at all. It was organized and it was deliberate by members of the elected members of the Congress on the far right, House Freedom Caucus in the House, the certain senators, certain governors like the governor of Florida. And then it was amplified every night on Fox News, and they document, from 2 groups, Media Matters and a research group in Switzerland, how those nighttime Fox News anchors every night falsely discredited the effectiveness and safety of vaccine. And so it started with the Conference of Conservatives in July 2021. They said first they're going to vaccinate you, and then they're going to take away your guns and your Bibles. And as ridiculous as that sounds, people in my state of Texas and neighboring states bought into that and refused to get a vaccine. They were victims of a predatory movement on the far right.
I think about where this lack of trust began. I mean, I can understand people, unfortunately, wanting to jump on the bandwagon and use it for their own purposes. But I think about, prior to the movement that vaccines cause autism. I remember when I first started hearing that and thinking it was absolutely ridiculous, and yet it gained speed quickly. Was there a time
That's
before
right.
that, or was that really what started the lack of trust towards vaccines?
Yeah, I think that is how it began, I believe. And I got involved in this because I have 4 adult kids, including my youngest daughter, Rachel, who has autism and intellectual disabilities. And a previous book I wrote is called Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, and which debunks all the phony stuff that anti-vaccine groups were saying. And that wound up making me public enemy number 1 or 2 with anti-vaccine groups, but it also gave me a front row seat to this, and I watched it morph or shift from falsely discrediting vaccines saying they cause autism to becoming a political enterprise on the far right. And by it being adopted by a major political party in the United States, that gave it incredible strength and power, and you saw the full force of this in the death and destruction that it caused in terms of so many Americans losing their lives. And now we're exporting this stuff. We're exporting it to Canada. We're exporting it to Western Europe, Central Europe, even low and middle income countries. And so I met with the World Health Organization towards the end of last year to sound the warning that as bad as things have been, the globalization could mean that things are much worse, and they're spilling over to all childhood immunizations.
When you try to deal with this topic, sometimes, as I said off the topic, can get a little wild because different people had different ideas. I would ask you one thing, and I know this came up a lot at the beginning when people said, who were anti-vaxxers, if you will, said there's no way this vaccine, first of all, it was developed too quickly. There's no way it is what they say it is. I'm sure you were confronted with that as well. What was your answer to that in terms of people suddenly becoming scientists and deciding that, no, this vaccine developed so quickly can't be real. It can't be good for you. It must be dangerous.
Well, the reality is it really wasn't developed that quickly. It was done at the same time frame all the other vaccines were. So we started developing coronavirus vaccines more than 12 years ago and identifying the spike protein as a target and how to deliver the spike protein. But that kind of flew under the radar screen. And I think what happened there was the CEOs of the company, in order to, when they release press releases, they're not trying to impress you. They're trying to impress their shareholders and want to make it seem like what they've done was extraordinary. And it was in a sense, but it wasn't so different from what had been going on the last 12 years. And it was tone deaf to what people might perceive as just something that must be rushed and maybe not adequately tested for safety. None of that was true, but some of the messaging from the pharma companies are partly to blame for that as well.
And what about to the question of, people point this out all the time as well, side effects from this particular vaccine from COVID? I mean, we have that from all vaccines. Why do you think that caught on?
Well, I think part of it was so many people got immunized at once. We haven't had an adult immunization campaign at this level. I can't even think of a precedent in modern American history. So so when you have tens of millions of people getting immunized, even if it's a tiny subset that have adverse reactions to the vaccine, it's still a significant number. So I think the fact that we had an adult immunization system that was never used to doing anything on that scale and how to manage that, I think that was also part of it.
Are we just stuck with this now? Like this anti-science movement is here to stay, or do you ever see it ending or us turning a corner somehow?
Well, in the past, what's happened is when kids weren't getting their immunizations at the level we wanted, we'd see breakthrough measles or whooping cough, and parents in the community would see their kids being hospitalized or in the intensive care unit, and there'd be this kind of self-correcting mechanism or autocorrection where there'd be a catch-up vaccination campaign. But, with 200,000 Americans needlessly dying, I'm not seeing that. In fact, what I'm seeing is kind of a doubling down from far-right groups wanting to falsely claim it was the vaccines that killed Americans, not COVID, or that the scientists invented the virus. So there's this kind of doubling down and whitewash or revisionist history going on, and that's also very troubling.
Well, what have we learned now? I don't want to run out of time with respect to COVID. So we know now where we are. There's another campaign that will start in the fall in about another 2 weeks from now. With respect to COVID itself, do we know much more about it now than we did, say, 2 years ago?
We have. We've learned a lot about that the spike protein is the most important target for the vaccine, and we now can measure the new variants that are emerging. So the new booster or annual immunization that's now was just made available to people in the U.S. and soon Canada targets those XBB variants. And those are the ones that are rising right now in terms of causing hospitalizations. It's important people get it because if it's been so many months since you've last gotten your immunization, there is some waning immunity. The hope is that this could be the last gasp of COVID-19. Maybe yes, maybe no, but we'll see. But in the meantime, while you've got these new variants circulating, this is the best immunization to take.
And it should be done in conjunction with, here we now have free flu shots. We didn't before. So just if it's available to you, get it.
Yeah, get your get your annual flu shot. And here in the United States, if you're a senior, there's a new vaccine for respiratory syncytial virus, RSV. So we're going to be looking at a bunch of new adult immunizations that'll be made available. There's already Shingrix for shingles and Prevnar for pneumococcal disease, and that's a good thing because it can extend your life. I
would ask one last question. Perhaps this is a bit unfair, but going through what we did in COVID, and you consider the last time that happened was 100 years ago, right, during the Spanish flu. I wonder, do you think we ever get back into a situation like this again, given the fact that we're able to develop vaccines as quickly and efficiently as we can? Is that something we still have to worry about?
Well, it's going to be a situation, I think, where the technology outpaces our social and political institutions that we have to manage it. So, if there's another pandemic, whether there's another major coronavirus over the next decade, as many of us think, or a new avian or zoonotic influenza or some other virus pathogen, I have confidence that we can develop vaccines very quickly. The question is now, with all the negativity around it, will that be a showstopper?
Mm-hmm.
And will we continue to see low uptake? And that's the way it may play out.
Yeah, because if you're making them fast but nobody wants to get them, what difference does it make?
Yeah, I mean, the number of Americans who took the bivalent booster last year was only 20% of those eligible, and we're starting to see similar numbers probably for this one. So, what makes us think it's going to be any better when the next emerging pathogen comes along?
Dr. Peter HOTEZ, the book, by the way, is called The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, A Scientist's Warning. Doctor, I want to thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. My grandfather's from Montreal, so I'm a Habs fan. So.
There you go.
Awesome.
Even better. Say hi to your grandfather.